On a Monday morning, the chill inside the Precision Automotive warehouse had yet to bite through the air, but Rebecca Williams's voice sliced through it faster than any cold front ever could. She stood in the center of the crowd, her blonde hair tied neatly behind her neck, holding her phone up in front of David Jackson and pressing each word with a smirk on her lips. "If you fix that engine, I will marry you." The entire warehouse erupted in laughter, not because the line was funny, but because everyone knew it was never meant as a joke. It was an open insult wrapped in a dare, a performance crafted to go viral and to make a spectacle out of a black man with no degree, no title, just a pair of calloused hands and a name that carried no weight in a company addicted to credentials. David stood still, saying nothing, his eyes locked on the machine as if each bolt inside was whispering something only he could hear. No one among the jeering crowd knew that his silent nod was not surrender, but a beginning. Every time David held his tongue, he was thinking deeper, remembering longer, seeing farther. Rebecca, dressed in a blazing red blazer, believed she had the upper hand, but she had no idea what she had awakened inside a man dismissed by the entire system. David Jackson was 38, raising his daughter alone after losing his wife in a car accident 5 years earlier. He had never studied at MIT, never hung fancy certificates on a wall, but his hands had touched engines that 5 precision engineers had declared unfixable. The one on the bench was a prototype worth $200,000, hailed as a breakthrough in electric vehicle technology, promising to boost range by 60%. After 3 weeks and hundreds of man-hours, the expert team had declared it dead. But a careless joke during a tense production meeting changed everything. Someone had said that maybe David, the local repair guy down the street, could fix it faster. And Rebecca, always ready to defend her ego, twisted that comment into a cruel challenge. "He has 5 days," she announced in front of the entire staff. 5 days to do what my team of engineers could not do in 3 weeks. And when he fails, everyone will see why some people need to accept their limitations. The words were recorded, shared, laughed at in every internal chat group across the company. Mike from sales joked that David probably could not fix a toaster. Sandra from HR commented that maybe it was time someone told him he did not belong here. Those words reached his daughter Jasmine's phone through school social media. She came home with red eyes and trembling lips after being mocked by classmates. David held her in his arms, gently calming her down, but inside him, a familiar rage stirred. It was the same feeling he had tasted when a doctor at the public hospital told him there was nothing more they could do for Linda, and maybe a private clinic would have offered a better chance. The same helplessness in the face of a system built on power, prestige, and unspoken rules. In his small garage on the south side of the city, where chip paint clung to the walls and the tools were mostly secondhand, David began to decode the engine that 5 men with graduate degrees had given up on. He did not rely on machines worth the price of a house. He used instinct, experience, and the kind of mechanical fluency that comes from thousands of hours under the hood. He was not just searching for a fault, he was searching for a pattern. And what he found was not natural wear. 3 core components had been deliberately altered. The damage was precise, too precise to be accidental. It was sabotage. Carefully engineered failure designed to bury something much deeper. This was no longer just a technical problem. It was a sign of something darker, a human hand hiding behind the machine. David documented every detail using his old phone. While the company mocked him, he quietly built a visual archive of evidence. No one expected someone like him to know how to preserve proof. But Jasmine knew, and she helped him turn every photo into a structured digital file. She understood her father was not just fixing an engine. He was unraveling a truth long buried beneath polished conference rooms and pristine resumes. Rebecca kept laughing, kept making memes, kept posting humiliating videos. She created a WhatsApp group called Miracle Mechanic Updates, posting mocking messages about his progress. But her arrogance blinded her. She had no idea David was no longer working alone. Someone else had arrived. A black woman in her 50s with seasoned eyes and the quiet authority of someone who had earned the right to speak without ever raising her voice. Angela Morrison, PhD in mechanical engineering, a former industrial sabotage advisor for the FBI. She had listened to Rebecca's radio interview and recognized the pattern instantly. It mirrored cases she had investigated across the country. And now she stood at the door of David's small garage, not with pity, but with respect. I heard about you on the radio, and I want to see that impossible engine. Her words were simple, but heavy. For the first time since it all began, David opened the door and allowed someone into his world. Angela did not look at him like a mechanic. She saw a fellow investigator, a partner uncovering a broken system. She examined the images, the components, and nodded with the certainty of someone who had unmasked bigger conspiracies. This is not just sabotage, she said. This is a deliberate pattern of elimination designed to remove those who do not fit the mold of power. And so inside a small garage that smelled of oil and perseverance, two people from different generations and different paths stood together, realizing they were staring at the same crack running deep through the foundation. A crack no bolt could fix, no sealant could hide, one that required truth, not prestige. And this time, truth would not come from a marble boardroom or a televised panel. It would rise from the unlikeliest place, from a man the entire system laughed at. But he did not need to laugh back. He just needed to do one thing, and soon everyone would fall silent. Not everyone knows how to fight back in silence, but David Jackson did. When the humiliating jokes began circulating across the company, he said nothing. When Rebecca's first video went viral on the internal network, he watched it once without a word, then turned off his phone. That did not mean he forgot. What Rebecca and her crowd did not understand was that a man who had once held his dying wife in his arms, who had heard a doctor say there was nothing more they could do, did not flinch at petty office ridicule. For him, mockery was a paper cut over skin that had already been hardened by grief. They thought a few cruel words could break him. But in truth, he was memorizing every face, every laugh, every period, at the end of every message soaked in silent hate. In the small living room he shared with his daughter, the laptop screen cast a bluish glow on Jasmine's face as she carefully edited videos. 19 years old, yet already she understood how dignity could be torn apart in a digital world. She no longer cried, not because the pain had faded, but because she knew her father did not need tears. He needed clarity. He could not respond with influence. He could not speak louder than those who held the microphone. But he had her. And she had something school never taught, the ability to turn damage into documentation. Meanwhile, inside Precision's warehouse, Rebecca was still putting on her show with a crowd that loved the performance. She had created a private group called Miracle Mechanic Updates and filled it with memes and mocking comments about David. Day 2, he is probably still looking for the start button, she wrote, followed by laughing emojis. Carlos from accounting added that David was likely passed out drunk somewhere. Sandra from HR commented that sometimes people need to understand where they do not belong. Each message was not just a joke. It was a sign of something deeper, a pattern that revealed how a company preserves the illusion of excellence by quietly excluding those who do not fit its mold. But in the quiet of a small garage on the south side of the city, a different story was unfolding, written not with ink but with grease and resolve. Angela Morrison returned with a thick stack of documents. She had tapped her network to access 5 years of internal maintenance reports from Precision. What she found did not surprise her. It infuriated her. 8 failed engine prototypes followed the exact same pattern of tampering, deliberate and precise. Every single project had been led by either black engineers or women. Each time the leaders were demoted, fired, or pressured to quit. Each time the vacancies were filled by white engineers who had been waiting in the wings. Angela did not shout. She simply placed the file on the table and slid it toward David. "We are not just repairing an engine," she said. "We are dismantling a structure built on exclusion and silence." Samuel, the seasoned mechanic who had seen decades of the company's inner workings, was not far behind. After looking at the photos David had taken, he confirmed that the pattern matched what he had seen 15 years earlier. At the time, he had no proof, only suspicion. Now, that suspicion had a name, a face, and photographic evidence. Back then, he had been told to stay quiet. But some things do not disappear. They wait. At that same moment, Rebecca remained unaware that every status she posted, every image she shared, every sarcastic remark she typed was being quietly preserved. Not for vengeance, but for a truth that could no longer be erased. Evidence never lies, especially when it is compiled by someone the system tried to humiliate. And this time, David was not alone. He had Jasmine. He had Angela. He had Samuel. And most importantly, he had a truth that grew sharper with every passing hour. Rebecca believed she was still in control. She called into a local radio show and told the story her way, describing David as a mechanic with no qualifications trying to overstep his bounds. It was more than mockery. It was a public declaration that someone like David had no place at her table. But while she laughed into the microphone, another listener leaned forward in her office chair, eyes narrowing. It was Angela Morrison, the same woman who had helped the FBI uncover industrial sabotage. The tone of Rebecca's voice and the way she described the malfunction were too familiar. Within hours, Angela was back in David's garage, this time with more than curiosity. She asked no questions. She looked at the engine. She studied the markings David had made. She scrolled through the photos and notes he had compiled. Every image was sharp, every detail exact. David was not just a mechanic. He was a quiet investigator building a case with hands trained by years of survival. Angela recognized that kind of precision. He had the same discipline she had seen in people who had no choice but to be twice as good just to be noticed. They did not need to explain themselves. A single look said enough. Then Angela said something David would remember forever. What we are about to expose is not just a technical failure, it is a power structure protected by silence. That night, David sat alone in the garage. The engine was still open parts, exposed wires coiled like veins across the table. He did not reach for a wrench. He opened the documents Angela had given him and read every page. His expression was calm, not angry, just focused. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man patching engines in a forgotten corner of the city. He felt like part of something much larger, a battle that had been going on long before he arrived and would continue long after. And for the first time, he believed the truth was no longer hiding. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to explain. He only needed to keep doing what he had always done. And when the moment came, every laugh, every insult, every whisper would collapse under the weight of the facts they never saw coming. Wednesday began with loud laughter echoing from the meeting room at Precision Automotive. Rebecca walked in wearing a red blazer like it was a stage costume, her smirk too wide to hide. She had just finished a live radio interview where she turned her so-called prank on David into a full-blown performance, ridiculing him with smug satisfaction. The former chief engineer, once respected by many, now stood in front of his peers like a character in her comedy show, confident she was still running the game. In her eyes, David was nothing more than a piece of entertainment for the workplace circus, and she believed that within days the drama would end in roaring laughter and her own victorious mic drop. Outside the building, a woman in a gray overcoat stepped out of a parked car with cold determination. Angela Morrison did not wait for an invitation. She did not need one. She came as an expert, a witness, and a veteran of many rooms where justice was not a feeling, but a matter of fact. In her hand was a file that would silence every joke with the weight of undeniable evidence. Meanwhile, in David's modest garage, the engine noise died down when Jasmine walked in holding a cup of coffee. She handed her father a neatly bound folder. Inside were screenshots, comments, mocking videos, all carefully categorized and labeled by her. Each page was a snapshot of a toxic culture hidden behind professionalism. This was not just about Rebecca. It was about an entire system that had mastered the art of laughing when others fell, that justified bias with performance metrics, that disguised exclusion behind polished language and power games. David flipped through the pages. His eyes held no anger, only calm calculation. He understood that truth did not need shouting. It just needed to be seen clearly. Angela returned later that afternoon, bringing news that made David sit forward. She had obtained internal insurance records through a contact in claims verification. Their 8 documented mechanical failures over the past 3 years shared identical traits. Same pattern of sabotage, same sequence, same outcome. The project leads were always women or people of color, and after each failure, they were quietly replaced by white engineers from the company's core group, always under Rebecca's leadership. The data spoke for itself. It had no emotions, but it exposed a system designed to recycle power into the hands of a few by orchestrating the failure of others. Soon after Samuel appeared holding a personal folder he had hidden for years. He had once suspected sabotage, but never had the proof. Now, looking at the photos David had taken, he saw the same damage he had witnessed 15 years ago. Back then, he had been told to stay quiet to protect the company's reputation, but now he had nothing left to lose. And he had waited long enough. The 3 of them sat in the workshop, surrounded by the ticking of an old wall clock. David, Angela, Samuel. 3 generations, 3 lives pushed out of power's orbit, now sharing a single goal. No one needed to speak loudly. They understood that justice was not born from noise, but from preparation and unshakable resolve. At the same time, Rebecca created a public event on Facebook titled "The Wedding of the Century Between the Engineer and the Mechanic." She sent invitations to employees, longtime clients, and partners. She posted a photo of a simple red dress, captioning it with a joke about how the ceremony would only take seconds because nobody needed more time to celebrate a clear failure. Her latest video, where she impersonated David with a clumsy accent and awkward gestures, had already gained over 15,000 views on TikTok in under 12 hours. She was not just mocking his skills. She was mimicking his voice, his walk, even the color of his skin. The prejudice no longer hid. It had become the common language of everyday office banter. What they did not know was that each laugh was another piece of evidence saved. Jasmine looked at her father and asked if he was sure he wanted to keep going because these people were powerful. David looked back at his daughter and repeated what her mother once told her. Justice is when you stand not just for yourself, but so others won't have to endure the same. He was not fixing the engine to prove his worth. He was doing it to declare a truth. Knowledge has no skin color. And dignity does not need a degree to exist. That night, while most of the company slept peacefully in their arrogance, David stayed at the workshop. He was not just replacing parts. He was redesigning the entire structure using nothing but his experience and skill. Every step was recorded. Every adjustment was documented. A full technical report was being assembled, so precise no expert could dismiss it. He did not rush, because those who bring real justice never need to hurry. They only need to make sure that when the truth comes to light, it is undeniable. And David knew that day was approaching fast. Thursday, Rebecca Williams walked into the office, not as someone who had just won a game, but as someone who believed she had already won before the first move was made. The fake wedding, mockingly titled "The Wedding of the Century" between the engineer and the mechanic, had been scheduled. 2 o'clock Friday afternoon, right inside the Precision Automotive warehouse, with full staff attendance, special guests, and a private film crew. A public humiliation with one goal, only to force a black man without a degree to bow his head in shame. And in her mind, it was not even cruel. To her, David Jackson was the breathing image of everything she despised, someone beneath her who had dared to rise. She still had no clue that across the city an entirely different system was taking shape. Not inside cold tech-driven offices, but within a small garage where the scent of oil lingered in the air and light filtered through aged windows. There, David, his daughter, and a team of quiet allies were not gathering outrage, but compiling truth. Every mocking video, every racially charged message, every fabricated image, all were archived with precision. Jasmine, young yet sharp-eyed, edited and labeled every clip with timestamps and original sources. She was not doing this for revenge, but to shield her father using the only language this system respected: evidence. Angela Morrison, once a federal-level investigator in industrial sabotage, returned to her archives. There was no longer a doubt in her mind. What had happened at Precision Automotive was not a string of isolated incidents, but a calculated pattern rooted in prejudice. 8 failed projects in 3 years, all led by women or people of color, all followed by sudden promotions and bonuses for Rebecca and her circle. Success built on engineered failure. Careers crushed to create platforms for others. Angela had seen this model before. It needed no gunshot, no blood. It destroyed dignity, ended futures, and did so with smiling faces and empty applause. Samuel Torres, the old mechanic who had spent his entire career in the shadows of Precision, now stepped forward as a living witness. He spoke little. He did not need to. In his hands were old technical notes, photos of damage he once questioned but was told to ignore. Back then, he had kept silent, armed only with gut instincts. Now he had David Angela and a line of logic that could not be broken. As the three sat by the work table, the steady tapping of Jasmine's keyboard in the background, a plan came into view. Not to retaliate with anger, but with accuracy. Instead of interrupting Rebecca's stage show, they would let it proceed exactly as she intended. Her pride was the very snare she had set for herself. When she stood tall before her audience, that would be the moment the curtain dropped. No need to scream. Just project her own messages, her laughter, her words on the wall behind her, and let the evidence speak for itself. David continued to polish his technical report. Every replaced bolt was photographed before and after. Every rewired circuit was labeled with full documentation. He was not just fixing a machine. He was building a case that pinpointed 3 deliberate acts of sabotage, described their method, and identified distinct markings left by the one who had tampered with it. Then he went further. He improved it. He redesigned the cooling structure, enhanced energy transmission, and installed a smart sensor to reduce power usage. When complete, the engine did not just function, it ran better than the original design. That same night, while Rebecca laughed at her own distorted impression of David on social media, Angela quietly submitted the complete file to the Department of Justice, the National Engineering Board, and 3 major media outlets. No loud announcements, just precise timing. She knew truth did not need a megaphone. It only needed to arrive exactly when the world was watching. David, instead of preparing a speech, stood before the engine and placed his hand on its casing like a silent thank you. Not because it would clear his name, but because it symbolized what he had always believed: precision, patience, and truth that never needed dressing up. Jasmine sat by the garage door watching her father. She had seen him at his wife's hospital bedside, seen him hold back tears when bills piled up, seen him smile through insults from rude clients. But she had never seen him shine like this, not because he was about to win, but because he was finally allowed to be himself, to live by the truth he had passed down for years, that no one had the right to destroy someone just because they did not like how they looked. The spectacle Rebecca had choreographed was spiraling toward its finale, but she was unaware she was walking into her own collapse. While she believed David would show up for humiliation, David was preparing to arrive with silence that would still the room. He did not need to say a word. He only needed to start an engine and let it speak for him. Friday afternoon, the Precision warehouse was packed wall to wall. The air was thick with a strange mix of excitement and tension, like a crowd waiting for a play whose ending had already been spoiled. Rebecca walked in like a bride to her coronation, draped in a blazing red blazer, clutching a bouquet of plastic flowers, and holding a wireless mic directly linked to the company's internal live stream. All eyes turned to her, even the invited guests, seated like an audience waiting for a lesson in humiliation. But no one inside that warehouse had any idea that the moment they were anticipating would instead become the hour of unraveling, not with screams, but with proof that could not be denied. David entered just as Rebecca's voice rang through the speakers. He was not alone. Behind him walked Angela Morrison in a modest ash-gray suit holding a professional camera, while Samuel Torres positioned himself near the door, recording every moment on his phone. David carried a toolbox and an air of quiet authority. He stepped toward the engine, double-checked the wiring, wiped his hands on a faded rag, and looked straight into the crowd. No introduction, no excuses. Just one calm sentence. Before we begin, I think everyone should see something interesting I found during the repair. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Her smile twitched for a second, but she still had no idea what was coming. David pulled out an old phone and connected it to the projector Angela had brought. The white screen behind them lit up with the first image, a close-up of 3 engine parts, each sabotaged with precision. The cut marks were clean. The wear patterns matched perfectly. This was no accident. This was not a malfunction. It was technical sabotage. The room grew still. Nervous chuckles died. The mood shifted. Rebecca tried to cut in. Ridiculous. A man like you is just looking for excuses. But her words were sliced clean by a sharp, commanding voice. Angela stepped forward, lifted a folder high, and spoke with firm clarity. I am Dr. Angela Morrison, senior lecturer in mechanical engineering at the University of Detroit, and a former federal consultant on industrial sabotage cases. I have reviewed the evidence Mr. Jackson provided. I can confirm this engine was tampered with using the exact pattern seen in 8 previous federal cases. Rebecca staggered a step back. The glow in her eyes dimmed. For the first time, the confidence cracked. David moved to the next slide, then another. Each frame showed hard data, not to educate, but to expose. 8 projects, 8 engineers, all either people of color or women, all sabotaged in the same calculated fashion. And after each collapse, the same engineering group was promoted, celebrated, rewarded. Samuel stepped forward, carrying documents kept hidden in his drawer for decades. I spent 40 years in this company. I watched good people get pushed out, not because of incompetence, but because of the color of their skin. And I watched Rebecca and her colleagues collect over $1.2 million in bonuses off the ruins of those careers. Rebecca's lips trembled. She turned to Jake, desperate for a lifeline, but Jake only stammered. We did not know. It was just a joke. David walked closer, his gaze steady and cold. A joke. One that got my daughter mocked at school. One that turned my name into a meme. One that erased the careers of dozens of people who were never given a second chance. His voice dropped, but its chill swept the room. The warehouse fell into silence. Angela raised another stack of printouts. Screenshots of internal messages from the company's WhatsApp groups. Conversations between Rebecca and her inner circle, discussing how to get rid of engineers who did not fit the mold, using coded language about company culture and openly derogatory terms about race. The messages flashed on the screen, needing no commentary. The words spoke for themselves. Guests began leaving quietly, faces pale, eyes dodging the lens of Angela's camera. Thomas Crawford, the CEO, had been present the entire time, not at the front, not under the spotlight. He had been standing in the back watching. When the final image disappeared from the screen, he stepped forward, his jaw set. Rebecca, my office, now. But David held up a hand. I'm not done. He returned to the engine, calmly turned the ignition. The engine purred to life, smooth and powerful, better than any previous performance ever claimed by the former team. This is not a restoration. This is an upgrade. I improved its efficiency by 15% using nothing but experience and integrity. No degree, no office, just a set of hands and a conscience. Rebecca collapsed into a chair, face drained of color, tears streaming down. No one laughed. No one moved. What they had witnessed was not a public takedown. It was the reckoning of a culture that had thrived on silence and applause. David stepped into the center of the space. About that proposal you made on Monday, thank you. But I will have to decline. I only accept offers from those who see me as a man. And in that moment, the Precision Warehouse was no longer the stage for a farce. It became the place where truth was spoken. No shouting, no defense. Just one engine repaired by a man who had nothing but his craft and his honor. And honor, when it walks beside real talent, makes even the loudest pride bow its head. The moment that engine roared back to life with a smooth hum and power beyond its original specs, not a soul in the warehouse dared to breathe too loud. The air thickened into a silence so absolute it felt physical. Rebecca, once the woman who strutted through this very floor like the lead in a bitter comedy, now sat frozen eyes, red body slumped like something had drained her from the inside out. There was nothing left for her to say. No excuse could erase what had just been exposed. And under the quiet glow of the overhead lights, David Jackson stood tall. Without needing to speak another word, his presence alone was proof that dignity, when forged in silence, effort and sincerity cannot be smeared. Jake hovered behind the crowd, face pale, clutching his phone like it was a lifeline. He knew now that he was not just a witness. He was a participant in what had been revealed. On the big screen, the video Jasmine had recorded played again. In it, Jake mocked David's voice with cruel mimicry, his movements laced with condescension. The laughter from that day echoed through the room now like jeers from a courtroom of ghosts, each echo condemning those who thought cruelty could be passed off as humor. No one came to his defense. No one even shifted. The room had been forced to look into a mirror they never knew they held. Angela Morrison stepped forward, voice calm but cutting. All documentation and evidence provided by Mr. Jackson have been submitted to the Department of Justice, the National Engineering Ethics Council, and 3 major publications. Furthermore, every internal message, including private chats discussing strategies to exclude engineers of color from major projects, has been verified and forwarded to investigative agencies. The silence that followed was no longer the smug quiet from Monday. It was fear. It was shame. It spread like dry fire through a forest of arrogance. Rebecca tried to rise, but her legs shook. No one offered a hand. Gone was the chorus of sycophants she once used to silence dissent. Her reputation, once used like a club to keep others quiet, now hung on her like an oversized coat that could no longer cover the truth. She turned to Thomas Crawford, hoping for a reprieve, but the CEO met her gaze with one of firm resolve. "I let this joke start," he said, "but I'll be the one to end it. Effective immediately, you are no longer part of this company." The air thickened as David stepped down from the platform and walked straight to Jasmine. She looked up at her father, eyes glossy but glowing with pride. Outside the warehouse, the sun sank gently behind Detroit's rooftops, casting everything in a golden hush. But inside the hearts of those who had witnessed this reckoning, something shifted. They no longer saw David as just a mechanic without a degree. They saw him as the man who had forced an entire system to confront its conscience. Jake stumbled forward, stammering something that could have been an apology, but David lifted a hand and stopped him. He looked straight at the man who had conspired with Rebecca to destroy him. "You mocked me, humiliated my daughter, sabotaged careers just because those engineers didn't look like you. This wasn't a joke. This was a crime." Angela stepped up again, this time holding a mic, her message clear. "All files have been forwarded to 3 federal agencies. Criminal proceedings will begin within 72 hours. The room held its breath. No one moved. No one dared to look at the screen where more chat logs scrolled in silence, revealing lines like cleanse the team of non-traditional elements or phase them out using technical excuses. Each phrase cut deep, peeling away the facade of professionalism the company once took pride in. Thomas said nothing else. He turned and walked out, leaving behind a room colder than any performance review ever held. David moved toward the exit, but paused at the threshold. He turned to look once more at the warehouse floor where he had been mocked. "I don't want pity," he said. "I just want you to look at yourselves. If someone like me could be made fun of, so easily imagine how many others had to stay silent just to survive." No one answered, and that silence was the loudest confession of all. Outside, he took Jasmine's hand. They walked down the worn asphalt path, no applause behind them, no crowd rushing in gratitude, because what David had done wasn't about being right. It was about showing his daughter that even when truth is buried deep, it will grow if someone dares to dig. And he had done just that, not with power, not with titles, but with a heart and hands that never learned how to quit. Behind them in that building that once echoed with smug laughter, only the tremor of awakening remained. A company that once prided itself on professionalism now had to face a harder question. Does professionalism mean fairness, or has it been a mask for silence? For David, the journey was far from over, because justice does not end when truth is recognized. It begins when those pushed aside get the chance to rise again and define their worth with decency and skill. And today, that worth had been carved in stone with something no one could erase. Not awards, not rank, not privilege. It was carved by pride, perseverance, and a belief that cannot be bought. 6 months after Precision's warehouse fell silent, the glass doors of a 13th floor office in downtown Detroit opened quietly. On the polished brass plaque by the door, a name now engraved with weight and clarity, David Jackson, Director of Technological Innovation, Precision Automotive. Inside the sunlit office, David stood quietly by the window, holding a cup of black coffee with no sugar eyes. Sweeping across streets he once drove through in an old delivery truck to drop off auto parts just to keep food on the table. The dream was never about having an office. It was about having the power to reshape the way a system treated people like him. Thomas Crawford had not taken long to act once the truth came out. Rebecca Williams was terminated on serious grounds, facing 3 criminal charges, including industrial sabotage, racial discrimination, and conspiracy to manipulate hiring protocols. Jake Silva was escorted out the following week, and soon found himself tangled in an investigation when new evidence showed he had leaked confidential data to competitors. Precision's reputation now hung in the balance, and Thomas knew that if he wanted to preserve the company's soul, he had to place it in the hands of the very man that the organization once cast out. David did not offer apologies when asked to return. He did not express gratitude. He asked for one thing only: complete autonomy to build a department where those once overlooked could shape the future of innovation on their own terms. The Department of Technological Innovation was born not as a hierarchy, but as a boundaryless space where credentials and backgrounds took a backseat to capability and passion. David built a program that paired seasoned mechanics with fresh engineering graduates, forming project teams based on collaboration, not competition. Within 6 months, pilots had launched across 5 states, and 3 major investors approached to replicate the model. No money had gone into advertising. The only thing that spread was results, and the story behind them, a story of a man once ridiculed in front of a crowd who now used those same hands to redefine what competence looked like. Angela Morrison did not return to academia. She accepted a full-time advisory role beside David, overseeing recruitment and structural reform. In every meeting and spreadsheet, she exposed the subtle biases in candidate evaluations, where unfamiliar names were the first to be dismissed, and recommendation letters from local colleges were never read past the opening lines. She did not raise her voice. She let the numbers speak. And as hiring outcomes began to shift, as acceptance rates for engineers of color rose, as those once marginalized began to lead their own projects, she allowed herself a quiet smile and said, "Fairness is not a word, it is a system." Samuel Torres also came back this time as senior advisor in David's department. He brought not just expertise, but the memory of a time when silence was the only way to survive. In technical training sessions, he often said one thing: people remembered, never let your silence become the excuse someone else uses to speak louder. With Samuel on board the development of the next generation, electric engine accelerated at twice the original timeline. The very engine David once repaired had been refined 3 times since and was now in licensing talks with 2 major European firms. Jasmine, once the girl who edited hateful videos of her father alone in a tiny apartment, was now a freshman in mechanical engineering at Michigan State University on a full scholarship funded by the very company that once shunned him. But she did not stop there. She became a youth leader by launching a digital platform for underprivileged students, teaching them editing, data analysis, and academic portfolio building. For Jasmine, sitting in a classroom was not the finish line. It was the beginning of changing how the world viewed a young black girl from a working-class neighborhood. Rebecca disappeared from the news. Every attempt to rebuild her image failed. Her post on a professional networking site titled "Growing Stronger Through Challenges" was flooded with hundreds of replies referencing her discriminatory conduct still documented on multiple public platforms. No company wanted its name tied to such a past. Her business card became the relic of an era where arrogance drowned in truth. That afternoon, in his 13th floor office, David received a call from the same radio program that once aired the first public insult against him. This time, the host's voice was low and sincere. "We would like to invite you to share your journey from mechanic to the man leading change in the industry." David agreed, not to celebrate, but because he knew there were still people out there being pushed into the shadows. If one story could help them see that dignity does not need to scream to be heard, he was willing to tell it. During the live broadcast, the host asked, "What are your thoughts on Rebecca now?" David paused, then replied in a calm tone, "I am not angry at her. I feel sorry. Sorry because she had every tool to build something great, but chose to use her skills to keep others beneath her. The greatest wrong she did was not to me, but to her own potential, by relying on exclusion to define her success." When he got home, Jasmine was preparing dinner. She looked up and asked, "Did you ever think you were going to win that day?" David smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your mother once told me dignity is not about never falling, it is about standing up the right way. And sometimes letting people look down on you is the greatest advantage you can have. Because when they are busy laughing, they never see what you are quietly building. And by the time they do, it is too late." One autumn morning, as sunlight angled through the tall glass windows of his high-rise office, David Jackson sat quietly before his screen reading the headline splashed across the front page of a major business magazine. David Jackson, from outskirts mechanic to symbol of electric industry reform. Just 6 months ago, that name was still spoken with smirks and judgmental eyes. Now it had become a symbol of a quiet but profound shift, a reminder that the ones once pushed aside can create space for others to step forward. The article made little mention of the scandal at Precision. It did not have to. What David had done after the storm was what truly mattered. For half a year, he never spoke sharply to the press. He never posted on social media. No anger. No retaliation. All he did was continue. He built, he improved. He gave chances to people who had once stood where he stood. He understood that revenge would never last as long as reconstruction, and that kind of rebuilding could only start in places too small for stage lights, where only sweat, patience, and unshakable belief could survive. Angela Morrison, in a private meeting with the industry's board of leaders, said something that left the room in a long silence. David is not changing the industry. He is reminding us why it existed in the first place. Not to rank people against one another, but to use technology to serve life with fairness and integrity. After that meeting, many companies began reviewing their internal practices. Not out of fear, out of shame. They began to see that what happened to David was not an isolated error. It was a symptom of a deeper flaw in the system that needed fixing. In the mentorship program, David had founded a young engineer named Malik, was paired with Mr. Samuel Torres. Malik was a community college graduate with no outstanding GPA, but he could read blueprints like they were his native language. Within 3 months, they developed a new transmission system that cut energy consumption by 15%. When the prototype passed testing, Malik said, "One thing Mr. David gave me the chance no one else ever did. I do not need to thank him. I just want to build something he can be proud of." David nodded, saying nothing, but in his heart he knew this had been his quiet mission since those nights spent alone on cold warehouse floors. Jasmine had not slowed down either. She expanded her digital learning platform for underprivileged students and became the face of a new statewide education campaign focused on equal access to technology. At a conference, she spoke about the day she saw her father mocked across social media. She said, "If that day had not happened, I might never have learned to fight back through action. I do not want my father to be respected because he won. I want him to be respected because he was always right." One late afternoon, as David reviewed a proposal to expand the program internationally, an assistant knocked and handed him a small package. Inside was a handwritten letter from someone who did not sign their name, but the note below made it clear who it was. "I was one of the people in the front row that day, laughing at you laughing because I thought it would help me blend in. I am not apologizing to be forgiven. I am apologizing because I once thought silence was neutral. Now I see that silence can be complicity." David folded the letter and placed it in his drawer without replying. He did not need anyone to punish themselves for the past. What he needed was change. And change only begins when people accept the responsibility that is theirs without hiding behind circumstances. Rebecca Williams did not vanish. She lived quietly in a small city where few cared what had once happened at Precision. She tried to start over, sending applications to small firms, but her past followed her in every search result. Once she posted an article about rebuilding and facing consequences. The comments underneath neither attacked nor forgave her. They simply reminded her that rebuilding a life was not as hard as facing the truth of the pain she had caused. And that was something Rebecca had never found the courage to do.